Please join me in welcoming Daniel Forger to the library for tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for braving the good Michigan weather and coming out here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm a huge fan of the library for the 20 or so years I've lived here. My kids are here, and I remember taking them to, there's a nursery parent group, and having them play around, and we play the summer game. I get lots of books from you, so thank you very much to AABL. So I thought how I'd divide the time is I'd speak about 30 or so minutes, talking about the book, also doing a bunch of readings, and showing you a bunch of images from the book. So I'll give you a pretty brief overview of everything in it. And then after that 30 or so minutes, I'd be happy to take any questions you have. And I have a whole list of questions actually prepared for me, in case you don't have any. I did an event in Grand Rapids where Willard Larkin, who headed the research on sleep and fatigue for the Air Force for many years, was my interviewer. And oh gosh, did he have strong and good interviewing questions. So we could use some of those, and I'm very grateful for him for that. But also, I'm very happy to take any questions from you about your own rhythms, about ideas you have, and so forth. I think it might be helpful to take a step back and look generally about what inspired the book and what generally I work on. I'm a professor of mathematics. I'm also a professor of computational medicine and bioinformatics. On Google, bioinformatics in the med school will come up first. So actually, I think that's how I'm listed in a lot of the library events. But my main appointment is a mathematician. And my publicist said, by the way, when you do a book event, don't tell people you're a mathematician. So that's the first thing that I'm saying. And I've been studying biological rhythms from the very beginning. I've been really interested in this, and I'm actually kind of lucky that one of my graduate students, one of my collaborators are here. It's been a fun journey. It's taken me all across the world. I just got back from a one-week tour of South Africa, which was really quite awesome. And about, was it 2 years ago, something like that, an editor at MIT Press sent me an email. He had published a book that I wrote previously on biological clocks, rhythms, and oscillations. And that book is open access. So by the way, if you're interested in that book, you should be able to download that book for free. And that book as well was very mathematical. I think it definitely hundreds of equations, if not more. So I got an email from him saying, would you like to write one of these essential knowledge series books? I said, well, I don't really know what those are. And by the way, I'd rather write a book for you about music and Bach. And he said, well, why don't you just try this and see what would happen? And I said, oh, well, I'll never write this book. I have no time. I should be spending all the time, my kids, my projects, all that other stuff. But somehow, late at night when I couldn't sleep, when I was sitting on an airplane, other places like that, even towards the end at a Boy Scout campout, when the Boy Scouts were all asleep, I put on my red headlights and started to jot some stuff down. I know at one point our family was going to go to Puerto Rico, and we had to cancel at the last minute. That gave me a whole bunch of time where I just went to coffee shops and read it. So I'll do the very first reading, which happens in the acknowledgments section. And it says here, this manuscript was written anywhere besides my office, Claryville, which is where my parents have a cabin in upstate New York, Condado in Puerto Rico, downtown Detroit, Nairobi, and anywhere in between. So anyway, eventually I had a draft of a manuscript, and that was enough, and eventually it got published. I tell a lot of stories along the way. When my daughter picked up the book, she saw a couple of stories about her. And about collaborators, I checked in with them before doing it. So hopefully it will tell you a bit about all these rhythms. What it's really about and Willard said this, is he said, talk about biological rhythms, but really it's about your health. And it's really about all the devices that are now monitoring our health. So for instance, I'm wearing an Apple Watch. Many of you may be wearing those sorts of devices or Fitbits, and these are only going to become more ubiquitous. They're getting a tremendous amount of data, and all this data is rhythmic. Everything about your life, everything about your physiology is rhythmic. I would challenge you to pick one aspect of your physiology that's not affected by sleep or changes on a monthly time scale or a yearly time scale with the seasons and so forth. So if you end up looking at all this data, you will end up seeing all sorts of these rhythmic patterns, and these rhythmic patterns have great meaning. It's basically your body timing all sorts of events. At every moment, your body's like, I should be awake now. I should be hungry now. I should be going out for a run now, etc. And that's giving us great signals as to what's happening inside of our bodies. And as time progresses, we're going to learn more and more about this language, and I think this will, in the end, lead to much better health. So I wanted to tell that story to the general public, and I also saw the books out there were arguing often different aspects of it, different approaches. For instance, there was a lot of literature that was saying there's only one true rhythm, and that all we have to do is measure a circadian phase, what time your body actually thinks it is. But the 2017 Nobel Prize showed us, which was for circadian rhythms, showed us that every cell in our body is timing things. Every cell in our body has a clock, and that's a very complicated thing, but a very beautiful thing. And that's kind of what I wanted to explain. Another thing about the book is all about human rhythms, but basically all the insights we've learned from humans, we've actually learned from lower animals. The 2017 Nobel Prize was in Drosophila. I've published papers from cyanobacteria to neurospora and so forth. And with all these rhythms around, I thought I'd just begin the book and just read for you the first paragraph or so. The secret language of your vital signs. Rhythms abound. All life on Earth adapts to the planet's 24-hour rotation. Ancient civilizations understood the importance of rhythms for planting crops and harvesting. 7-day weeks existed in Hindu and Chinese civilizations, and as far back as at least the Babylonian periods. My wife studies Middle Eastern history and other things, so I get points for mentioning Babylonians, I guess. In almost all aspects of life, timing is essential. Timing is so fundamental that cells have built-in clocks to time events. We pay thousands of dollars for a Rolex when we have billions of internal clocks, all for free. So it's this really fascinating idea for me that basically every cell in our body has its clock. It's a sophisticated clock. It could tell lots of things. It could work at all sorts of different temperatures. It works despite the fact that cells can divide very quickly, or in terms of neurons, not really divide at all. So putting that all together seemed rather important. And one of the cool things about the books in this series, which is a pretty popular series, is that they have these big pull-out quotes. And so the first one says, wearables can measure heart rate, temperature, and other rhythms in the real world over long periods in large populations. So we're getting all this information from all these clocks as to how it's affecting our real lives. But sometimes that information has problems with it. And I give, a little later, a bunch of examples of interesting phenomenon that we found from these rhythms. And my students know that I could spend days, even years, pondering what all these rhythms are. So here's one I like to discuss that it took me days, actually, to figure out what was going on. And like the Princess and the Pea, I couldn't kind of let it go. There was an individual who had increased heart rate over 100 beats per minute for hours. For several hours, this would repeat fairly regularly, often on a weekend. And there was nothing else remarkable about him. And this increased heart rate, there were no steps going along with it. there are higher steps, he's going for a run. That's an easy thing to do. Can anyone guess what was happening? Any ideas? We won't know for sure, actually, because almost all the data we get are anonymous by purpose. And I'll tell you about some apps. And we get that data anonymously, so we have no way of contacting you or knowing. So I don't know for sure. But eventually, we kind of figure it out. And I did a couple experiments on myself and saw the same pattern, bicycle riding. So his heart rate was going up because he was bicycle riding, but the watch was not picking up the steps because you don't go for steps. So there are all these interesting patterns that you have to figure out. And there's all sorts of real life events that are affecting it. But underneath all that are these inherent 24-hour rhythms where the body, for instance, in terms of heart rate, is trying to have heart rate higher at certain times of the day so that you're prepared to go for a run, so that if you're in the wild, if a lion is running after you, you're ready to run. And also at night, when your heart rate goes down, which will help you sleep, your immune system, if you're not sick, will also show a bit of a rhythm, will take a bit of a breather, probably because evolutionarily we're not being exposed to nearly as many germs in the middle of the night, unless you're flying to South Africa like I did last night, or Europe, or not last night, last week, or Japan. So the book highlights different types of rhythms, and we go through different types of rhythms that we sort of pick apart and give you lots of different insights. So maybe I'll start now and go through some of those different rhythms. The first rhythm we think a lot about is sleep. This is the one that's in the top of people's minds. In fact, it was a later chapter, and my editor's like, no, put rhythm. And in fact, I had melatonin first. And the editor's like, people want to know about sleep, Danny, much more than melatonin. So anyway, if you think about it, sleep is this really remarkable thing. I mean, as I begin the chapter, I say, what if I were to tell you that you would collapse, be transported to far-off worlds in the future and the past, and remember almost nothing of it? And each night we find ourselves in this unique world during sleep. 1/3 of our lives are a mystery. So it's a really fascinating rhythm that we have, and there are lots of interesting patterns that you could see in terms of different sleep rhythms. So we start to pick that apart, and we start to look at what those rhythms look like. One of the more interesting experiments that people did was people at Harvard wondered what it would be like to live on Mars. And there's a fair bit of discussion about humans going to Mars and so forth. And one of the things you should know is that the Martian day does not equal 24 hours. So can people, when they go to Mars, actually adjust to this? And there were a bunch of researchers who actually did those experiments. They brought people into the lab, and they were able to see that in some cases you could adjust to this Martian day, and some cases you couldn't. Now that's just one possible example, but now imagine the body, instead of trying to figure out what time of day it is on Mars, is trying to figure out what time of day it is right now on Earth. But you're a shift worker. You're getting light at all these different times, but yet your internal biological clock, which evolved evolutionarily, is still trying to figure out what the seasons is. It's trying to figure out from the light you're getting, is it in the middle of the summer, or is it in the middle of the winter? And that has a huge effect on all sorts of aspects of our physiology. We just published a paper actually showing that the human body, from wearables, that the human body is actually trying to track the seasons. And it's getting it very wrong. Because even right now, I'm getting a fair bit of light that's shining on me. When we wake up in the middle of the night and we go eat a cookie, we turn the light on. By the way, please help yourself to those cookies. We'll talk more about rhythms and time-restricted eating later on. So our bodies are getting quite confused. And I think that this is confusing definitely our sleep cycles. So there are lots of different patterns that we're seeing. It's almost as if our bodies are, in fact, it might even be more normal in certain cases if we were trying to live on a Martian day. So we talk a fair bit about those various patterns. I give some general advice, and I talk about interesting patterns as well. One I discuss is an I think he was 83-year-old man who ended up going into a sleep lab. So he's isolated from all signals. He had no idea what time it is. And this individual would have a nighttime sleep episode, and then he would always have a nap of about 2 years. Sorry, 2 hours, excuse me. All of a sudden, when he lost those time cues, the nighttime sleep out slowly decreased, and the nap increased, so that by the time he got out of it, he was having a long sleep out for his nap and a very short sleep out, at night. There are lots of other examples. There are individuals who are trying polyphasic sleep, which is trying to sleep just in small bursts of 2 hours. I could answer that right away. Don't do it. But I also should say that I'm a mathematician as well. So, if you're really thinking about your health, you should always do this, talking to someone in addition to me, some sort of an MD, and we actually do have at least one qualified MD in the room. So anyway, these sleep patterns are really interesting, and certainly we talk about a lot of the different patterns that are possible. The next rhythm, which is very much related to sleep, is melatonin. My guess is that several people in the room have taken melatonin for a variety of reasons. If they can't sleep at night, you could take melatonin. If you're going across time zones, melatonin. And melatonin is this really interesting signal. It basically tells the body when it's night. And that's really important because if you imagine you're in the wild and all of a sudden an eclipse happens, or you're living in a cave, or there's a whole bunch of clouds over, you don't want your body to start thinking that it's night. So melatonin really tries to give this signal to our body, okay, it's night, which will allow us to sleep. And I actually got in a little bit of trouble because one of the sections of it talks about light and melatonin's lunacy. So maybe I'll read a little bit about that. Nighttime light levels in the wild are high enough that they could be sensed by our biological clocks, our circadian or daily clocks, and achieve much higher effects during a full moon. Given this, could our clocks be programmed to track moonlight and sunlight? There's actually strong evidence for this in lower animals. Evidence is emerging that moonlight does indeed impact our sleep. Could this be encoded through melatonin? Our clocks have evolved through millions of years without worrying about the possibility of artificial light, except for the occasional campfire. Candles started to change this until the invention of the practical light bulb transformed our lives. Now we could choose light levels whenever we want. How should we then proceed? How does our ability to choose light levels affect melatonin production? Ken Wright, who I've met and know, took his students camping in the Rockies during the summer without flashlights or exposure to modern lighting. Melatonin levels quickly reset to timing dawn and dusk when individuals were separated from modern lighting. So this is quite interesting. We have this signal to our bodies to tell us that it's night, but our bodies are actually getting that signal wrong. But if you actually go camping, my family knows I love to camp, all of a sudden the melatonin starts to get that signal right. And we don't fully understand the implications of what's happening with melatonin. So anyway, that's melatonin. I talk about lots of principles there of how to cross time zones and so forth. And then the next rhythm is temperature. And I can't help but just read this section. You can imagine I said I did this, writing this on the margins, in between times. One of the things that I discuss here is about infections. Temperature is very much an indicator of infections and so forth. So I'll do another reading a bit later in the book. Consider the example of my daughter coming home yesterday with a stomach bug. Nothing serious, but the mac and cheese she ate at school did not entirely agree with her. I will spare you the gory details of last night. Usually she would be enjoying a game she developed of 20,000 rounds of Attack Daddy, but there was a delay tactic to bed. But I went into her room to take her temperature. It was above 98.6, but not enough to be called a fever. What does this mean? Typically, her temperature would be significantly lower during sleep, so it's high considering that. As we will see, though, this is the time of day when temperature could be elevated naturally by the circadian clock. So then it should be somewhat high. Yet she's lying down, which could lower the temperature. Nevertheless, she had a virus, which we could expect the temperature to be higher. So again, you see, there are all these different types of signals that could be contributing to temperature rhythms. And in fact, in the book, I've reproduced from a paper that we published. Actually, one of the senior authors, Sung Choi, is in the room today. And she was studying individuals, measuring their temperature who were immunocompromised to see when they had a fever. So you could look at this plot and try and estimate when this individual actually had a fever. But temperature, it was one of the hardest rhythms for me to study. And a bit later in the book, I talk about why. So here's one example of a book event or an interview that kind of went not quite as I was expecting it to go to. Shortly after one of my scientific papers was published, it received media attention, including the opportunity to go on a live radio broadcast. I was particularly excited about this and drove to the studio while practicing what I would say. Those of you who have seen The Godfather can kind of remember that scene. I waited outside the room and the host finished her previous work. Then the live sign lit up and then went dark. And then she quickly came out, the host, to greet me, set up the microphone just by my mouth, and the live sign lit up again. In my mind, the ensuing dialogue went something like this. I am excited that Dr. Forger, world expert on biological clocks, is joining us today. By the way, my paper was about the effect of a kinase on timing biochemistry within a cell. So the host said, I've been telling women to lean in closely and not miss this. Uh-oh. Dr. Forger, I am excited to have so many women listening to us. To this. Our biological clocks are ticking much faster than I ever thought. Many older women want to get pregnant. Please, Dr. Forger, tell us how to turn back time. Silence. This was not the kind of biological rhythms we explored in our paper. This interview probably exists on the web somewhere. Someone was very unprepared. You better believe I went home and I read every paper about temperature rhythms and ovulation and so forth. And it's actually used quite a bit to determine fertility now, and wearables will tell you about these things. So that's another thing that I talk quite a bit about. So finishing it up, one of the block quotes, we say, measuring temperature with a wearable measure temperature with the wearable, and it indicates if you're fertile, if you have an infection, you took ibuprofen, went running, or even the composition of fat to muscle or your size, and a whole bunch of other things. So you can see all these hidden signals there. Next comes heart rate. And for me, this is probably the rhythm I spend the most time thinking about. Here is one of the cases where I was able to slip in a daddy joke that the editors did not automatically remove. So heart rate, I talk a bit about being a graduate student. As I walked into my PhD advisor's office near Washington Square, New York City, in the fine print, his door plate read, Charles Peskin, Secrets of the Heart Revealed. Though he started in medical school, he decided to switch to mathematics after finishing a PhD because he saw the importance of new technology, new supercomputing charged with mathematics in understanding physiology. Charlie worked on everything from hearing, blood flow, circadian rhythms in mRNA. And for this, he is classified by genius by the MacArthur Foundation. His heart, though, was always, wait for it, in the heart. See, that was the only daddy joke that they allowed in this book. Anyway, and some of his infectious enthusiasm for heart rate must have rubbed off on me. So in the book, what I talk about quite a bit is how we analyze heart rate. And heart rate tells us a tremendous amount. In particular, it tells us we've been discovering a lot about our mood. And we actually just published a couple papers where the most important or the strongest markers from wearables that we could get of whether someone's manic or depressed actually come from heart rate signals and the heart rate rhythm, and how well aligned that is timed with sleep. And I think this is going to have a really important implication for people, because a lot of times when people are having difficulties with mental health, if they're able to fix their sleep and circadian rhythms, I think this offers a great promise. It's not going to solve everything, but it'll offer a great promise in a pharmaceutical way to bring people out of, manic or depressive episodes. Actually, doctors have known about this for a very long time. It's called social rhythms therapy and so forth. But it's heart rate that seems to really encode a lot of this signal. So heart rate isn't just telling us if we're going to be, having a heart attack, which the Apple Watch can tell you about these or a lot of these other things. It's actually telling us when our bodies are going to be more active and so forth. And then that leads also to the next chapter, for which I talk quite a bit about mood. And mood actually is one of, for me, the most interesting rhythms that you could study. As I say in one of these blog quotes, rhythms in mood are more complex to understand than the other ones. They reflect unpredictable events rather than an underlying timekeeper. Even defining mood can be complex. So if you think about someone's mood, there's so many factors that are affecting it. I can't predict about your work or personal relationships, your genetics, and so forth. But underlying all this is a circadian rhythm in mood. We're able to measure that. We've published on this, as well as also how that's regulating bipolar depression and other things. And even in normal individuals, when they work on shifts or so forth, showing depression-like symptoms. In fact, even clinical depression based on the PHQ-9. So the other thing you may know quite a bit about is that rhythms of mood are very much tied to the seasons. Seasonality, there's seasonal affective disorder. It's getting really dark right now, but it's not just a question of total darkness. It's actually our bodies trying to time these rhythms, trying to time when we should go to sleep and when we should wake up. And as those things get further apart or closer together, that's what tells our bodies what season it is. It tells animals when to reproduce. It tells people when to hibernate and so forth. And it also very much regulates our mood. So I think mood is also a really important part of all this. And then the last two chapters before the conclusion talk a bit about brain rhythms. Just so you know what's coming, I certainly believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, tons of people will be measuring continuously brain rhythms through, I should have brought them, just wearable EEGs. So you may know about their EEGs. If you've ever been to the hospital, it will measure the electrical activity of the brain. Now we could measure this in a really easy way. And in fact, in the book, I actually show some of my own measurements that were processed by one of my graduate students. And we don't have to do all that Elon Musk is talking about and insert probes into the brain. You could just wear a cap or wear headphones and pick up a lot of these signals. And I think they're going to tell us a lot about how fatigued we are, because we're actually terrible judges of our own fatigue. And this is actually going to be quite important, because also people's fatigue varies. Some people are very resilient, some people are not. And my hope is that eventually this will give some sort of an indication to some people that maybe they shouldn't be driving a $200 million Navy ship, Maybe they shouldn't be, driving a truck at that time of night. And we'll get more precise measurements out of it. The book has a lot of different examples of different rhythms and pictures of them. So I thought I would just show you one more. And what a lot of people might be the most interested in is rhythms in metabolism. Many of you have probably heard of time-restricted eating, and this idea that if I only take my calories over a certain number of hours of the day, I'll actually end up losing weight. And I fairly often will see because I'm typing time-restricted eating for research purposes, I'll see these, ads pop out of these extremely fit people. Like, I would love to to look like these people, and they're like, oh yes, just do time-restricted eating and you'll be okay. There's definitely some science to it, but it's not quite as easy, as I think people say. And part of it really relates to glucose, and there's a lot of people who are now doing continuous glucose monitoring. And this was done particularly for people who are diabetic, but I think this is going to make its way into the general population. So I actually include a picture of that. I'll find it in a second, and I thought I could show that to you. And then I guess my question for you, this is taken from a paper of an individual, I know the group, and your guess is, where was this taken from? So hopefully it should find it. Yep, give it a minute. So what you should be looking at here is a continuous glucose monitor. Okay, it's a little small, but hopefully you could see it. So that's the glucose level. You could see all these rhythms. And interestingly, they've plotted on this exactly what that person ate. Again, we should be able to do our body's response to it. Sometimes these rhythms actually predicted. Amazingly, rosé wine didn't really do very much, but tabbouleh did. Anyone want to guess what country this is from? This participant was from? Rosé wine and tabbouleh and, sorry, what? Pretty close. Go right in between them, you'll fit Switzerland. So anyway, I include a lot of these pictures in the book. In the end, I talk about this vision for how we could have rhythmic lives with the help of apps. A lot of people, have picked up on this. There was some of the people in the field said it. In fact, it begins with the book ends with the quote, "The need to welcome this new age of rhythmic self-discovery." And I think one of the ways we're going to be doing that is with apps. So I thought I would just end there and show you a couple of the apps that are being developed. So these apps will be collecting all the data from these wearables, automatically analyzing them and giving you various insights. We have one such app called Social Rhythms at the University of Michigan. That's actually free to download. Again, all the data we collect is anonymous, and hopefully this will only take a minute or so to do, but it could generate sort of geeky graphs like this, which will show you every day is another line when I'm taking activity, and the blue and the orange curves are measures of like my mid-sleep or my predicted what time my body thinks it is. We very soon will be giving lots of insights, not just this geeky like circadian phase, but when to get various activities and so forth, and in particular warning signs for individuals when clocks are misaligned that could have negative effects, like could be affecting mental health or other things. We're hoping to roll those out to students. I'll also mention I am the CSO of a cool company called Archoscope, spun out from the University of Michigan. And my graduate student is now my boss. She is the CEO of the company. She hasn't fired me yet. She's awesome. Her name is Olivia Walsh, and they've built some apps. Here's the Archoscope app. So you could see for my trip to South Africa, I'm 90% in the groove. I'm supposed to still be getting bright light till 8:55, and it give me all sorts of insights, even just general things, but, it'll show me all sorts of details of when I should go to sleep, when I should wake up, and this app actually is often used by shift workers. We published a really great paper recently, thanks to Sung Choi, who led the study, using an app helping people with cancer fatigue. I was particularly proud of that paper. Anyway, I think these apps are going to be sort of changing our world. So that's basically the point here, that I think by paying attention to a lot of these different rhythms, we could live much healthier, happier, productive lives. And that's why I put it into these books. A final selling point is that these books are really meant to be short, easy reads. So it's for the kind of people who their idea of a fun Saturday afternoon is to pick up a book and learn about a topic. So anyway, with that, thank you all very much for coming, and I'd be very happy to take a couple questions.
Yeah, I'm going to pass the mic around. That way the live stream can hear questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, I saw your hand, and then we can do you, and then pass it all around up front.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about traveling to different time zones?
Yes.
Sort of melatonin sort of was part of all that, but can you expound upon it a bit?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, how many hours do you have? So I think the hard part about it is that, getting light at the right time is a particularly important signal. But if you get light at certain times of the day, it'll make you better. At certain times of the day, it'll make you worse. In fact, there's even antidromic reentrainment, we call it, where someone is trying to go to Europe, but they end up shifting through all the time zones over the Pacific and all the time zones over over Asia to end up getting there. The simple answer is to try using an app. Olivia Walsh, that student, when she was a student of mine, we made an app called Entrain, and that was used by it was called Entrain. It's E-N-T-R-A-N. It's not available anymore, so don't write that down yet. But there was 300,000 people used it, which was crazy for free. In fact, of the free travel apps in the iPhone store, it went up to number 6, higher than Delta. That's how, we were not a company or anything. We didn't know what was going on. It was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. Now this Archoscope app that I just showed you will track that for you. So A-R-C-A, I did not choose the name, but A-R-C-A-S-C-O-P-E. And I should also say officially I do have a conflict, as does the Michigan financial conflict with that company. A-R-C-A-S-C-O-P-E. The app we have for free is called Social Rhythms, and that will also be putting some other features on. But if you want to travel across time zones, Social Rhythms will help you with that.
All right, I think I saw a question back here.
So I have a kind of general question about variability in physiological rhythms.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think a lot of people think about rhythms. They think of them almost like a metronome, a kind of consistency. But in fact, with heart rate, variability in heart rate is a sign of health, right? Of a stronger heart, right? So in that sense, a certain amount of irregularity in a rhythm,
yes,
for that metric is a sign of physiological well-being. So one question I have is the salient, or is the importance of variability in physiological rhythms, is that a more general principle across physiological rhythms for the human body? Hormones to all this other stuff, right? Do you want a certain amount of variability? And then the other question is how much variability you want, right? Because obviously, the questions of scale and duration in variability all of a sudden variability can become dangerous, right? And life-threatening and not a sign of health. So I'm just sort of wondering about those issues.
Wonderful question. I wish I had an hour to unpack that, but let me see if I could do it in 60 seconds. In some cases, variability can be bad. Variability in sleep timing with respect to the circadian clock is particularly bad for mental health. That seems to be emerging. If your body is saying this is when you should sleep, and you're not even for us necessarily you're very early or very late, but you're kind of moving around a lot, that to us is a key sign that you're probably about to have depression or depressive symptoms or things like this. But variability, as you say, in the right context, can tell you quite a bit. When that variability does go down, or even when the rhythms disappear, that also could be a positive thing. We had an interesting paper where we were able to pre-detect COVID from wearables. And I think this would have actually had a huge, from these rhythms, when the body has an infection, one of the first things it does is it shuts down a lot of its rhythms, right? You don't want the immune system to take a huge break at the middle of the night if you're fighting COVID or some other. And we were able to detect that a day or two before people showed COVID symptoms. But again, we were able to detect it in principle. It needed a lot more work and a lot more testing. And Stanford was working on this, and with a separate algorithm. Scripps was working on this. Eric Topol, who's a famous, was working on this too. And we were all beat out by the mRNA vaccines. Yeah. That was a great thing, of course. I'm very glad I got my mRNA vaccine. But if it hadn't, I think you would have heard more about there. That's an example of shutting off rhythms or variability. So. Cool, thanks.
This is just specific to me.
No, that's fine.
But I was very interested in the story you told about during sleep, the 85-year-old guy who napped
Yes.
2 hours after waking up. I've been doing that for like over a decade, and it drives me crazy because I, especially in the winter, lose out daylight, having to sleep, and all looking it up. I've never heard of another case, and I've done sleep studies and stuff. I've got I'm sleeping well, and I'm on a good rhythm. It's usually 10 to 6 or more hours every night, and yet 2 to 3 hours after I wake up every day, except when I'm on vacation,
Okay.
for the adrenaline, I think. But so what happened with this fellow? I mean, did he need to be
the story
treated?
I heard was that he donated his brain. This is a long time ago, and apparently he donated his brain to science. And the Harvard researchers, I think, I don't know. I haven't, but I don't think we'll really know what was happening with this individual. The answer to, I think what the answer might be, you might have even just said it, like adrenaline. The thing is that there are all these hormones that our body is releasing, telling us time to wake up, time to go to bed. In terms of actual sleep, there's a flip-flop, so your brain can basically only be awake or only asleep. But in terms of these signals, they don't have that flip-flop, so they could give conflicting signals. They could get out of whack from each other. And my guess is that that's often what's happening, and that's why we're working on multiple measures through heart rate, through predicting melatonin, and others to see where all these things lie. And then I think once we get that picture, we'll be able to much more precisely say, oh, it's your adrenaline and not your melatonin that's off, or things like that. We don't fully have the tools right now to answer all those questions, and that's probably good, because if we had all the tools, I wouldn't get any more grant funding and other things.
Just as a follow-up, you mentioned
I'd be out of a job.
that like shift workers and stuff can be very dangerous and
Yes.
lead to depression or whatever, to have your rhythms get off like that. Do you think that this need to nap is a dangerous signal? I mean,
I honestly, now I'm going to give the official answer, which is talk to your sleep provider and so forth. But I will say that just by taking naps isn't necessarily an indication that, and there are interesting phenomenon, like too little sleep or too much sleep can also be indicators of ill health. So, it's complicated, and I think we'd have to look more specifically at what you're going through and talk to some sleep physicians as
Yeah.
well, But
I'm looking
sometimes
into
they'll
it, but
ask
I was
for-
like, wait, wow.
So-
I've been looking into it for a
No,
long
and
time.
that's one of the things I like about you had these interesting conversations with people, and it gives us researchers new ideas. I was mailing a bunch of these books out when it first came out, and the person at the post office, he's like, you have to answer my questions. Actually, I'm really curious about Ramadan, because in Ramadan you do not eat from sunrise to sunset. And he asked me, is this healthy or is this not healthy? Because some people say it's very healthy and some people say it's not very healthy. I mean, the simple answer to this is that, he is observing Ramadan for religious reasons. So in some sense, it doesn't really matter whether, it's religion and so forth. But it's an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about. And so these personal experiences, trigger the mind of a lot of our researchers and cause us to think about these things. And you may end up that leads to a paper in about 10 years. Anyway, I could see my kids are, getting closer to their bedtime. So I very much appreciate everyone for coming out tonight. And those of you who read the book, I do hope you enjoyed it, and please reach out if you have any additional questions. Thanks.
Thank you all for being here. If you'd like to purchase a book, help yourself back at the book suite table and take some cookies to go.
Yep.
Thank you for being here.
And I'm happy
And thank
to
you to
sign
Daniel.
any. So.
Yes, and he can sign books if you'd ask.